A millionaire took his maid to a business dinner, and what she did shocked everyone. The night was particularly cold at the Grayson mansion, but the atmosphere inside was even colder. Elton Grayson, seated in his impeccably organized office, reviewed contracts and spreadsheets with his trademark stern expression. He was a highly successful businessman, known for handling any situation with an icy demeanor. He was the type who demanded perfection in everything: his investments, his life, and everyone around him. Any deviation from his carefully maintained order irritated him to no end. That evening, however, there was something beyond his control. His wife, Anne Grayson, who was always by his side at social events and business dinners, had fallen ill. Anne, his loyal partner, and the warm, charming face that softened his rigid public image, couldn't attend the most important event of the year. Struck by a severe flu, she was too weak to even get out of bed. Anne lay in one of the mansion's luxurious bedrooms, her pale skin stark against her auburn hair, as silk sheets covered her frail frame. Lisa Carter, the family maid, cared for her with unwavering dedication. Lisa had worked for the Graysons for years and was known for her efficiency and discretion. She was a humble woman, but her intelligence was apparent to those who paid attention. However, in Elton's world, Lisa was just a maid, someone whose life revolved around the confines of the kitchen and laundry room. As Lisa fluffed Anne's pillows, Anne tried to convince her husband, who had just walked into the room, that there was a solution to her absence. "You need someone to accompany you to the dinner, Elton," Anne said, her voice weak but resolute. "The investors expect it. They like to see stability. A united family." Elton sighed in irritation, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "And what do you suggest, that I take a friend? Hire an escort?" The idea seemed absurd to him. He trusted no one but Anne to uphold his public image. Anne cast a meaningful glance at Lisa, who was standing just a few steps away from the bed. Lisa paused, puzzled by Anne's gaze, unsure of what was coming. "Take Lisa," Anne suggested naturally, as though it were the most obvious solution in the world. Lisa's eyes widened in shock, and Elton let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "Lisa, have you lost your mind, Anne? How can I bring a maid to such an event? They'll laugh at me, at us," Elton scoffed, crossing his arms and lacing his voice with disdain. "Before continuing with this captivating story, I have a special request. Subscribe to the channel and help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Can I count on your support? Thank you. Now, let's continue." Anne remained calm, but there was an undeniable strength in her voice. "Lisa is more than just a maid. She's smart, well-mannered, and incredibly observant. I know she can help you get through tonight." Lisa took a step back, flustered by the situation. Never in her years working for the Graysons had she imagined being part of a conversation like this, let alone the center of it. "Mrs. Anne, I appreciate it, but this doesn't feel right. I'm not suited for something like this." Anne gave Lisa a kind but persuasive look. "Lisa, you've helped me so much over the years. I know you can do this. Just trust me." Elton, still unconvinced, scoffed again. "This is ridiculous. She has no idea how these events work. Lisa may be good at what she does here at home, but this is an entirely different world." Anne's brow furrowed, a rare display of her irritation. "You don't have a choice, Elton. I can't go, and you know showing up alone would be a mistake. Lisa will be perfect. Besides, you won't be alone. You'll still be in control, as always." A tense silence filled the room as Elton considered her words. He hated to admit it, but Anne was right. He couldn't risk his reputation by attending the dinner alone. Reluctantly, he sighed in resignation. "Fine, Lisa will come with me. But let me be clear. You'll stay silent. Just accompany me, and don't interfere." Lisa nodded, though anxiety began to creep in. She had never been one to draw attention, and the thought of attending an event filled with wealthy, powerful people terrified her. When Elton left the room, Anne took Lisa's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Believe in yourself, Lisa. You're much more capable than you realize," Anne said with an encouraging smile. Lisa barely slept that night, consumed by thoughts of how she could avoid embarrassing her employers, especially Anne, who had always been kind to her. The next day, Anne insisted Lisa choose one of her dresses to wear to the dinner. Lisa resisted, feeling unworthy of such luxury, but Anne was adamant. "You'll dress like a lady because that's exactly what you are, Lisa," Anne said. Eventually, Lisa chose a simple black dress, elegant but understated, that Anne complimented with a string of pearls. When Lisa descended the grand staircase, ready to leave. Elton was already waiting in the foyer. He glanced at her briefly, barely hiding his impatience. "I hope you're ready to do exactly as I instructed. Stay silent and follow my lead." Lisa simply nodded, swallowing her unease. During the drive to the hotel, the silence in the car was so heavy, it was almost tangible. Lisa stared out the window, trying to imagine what lay ahead. All she knew was that she needed to do her best not to disappoint Anne. Yet, deep down, a flicker of something else stirred. Fear mingled with hope. For years, Lisa had dedicated herself to the Graysons, always feeling invisible, like just another cog in a larger machine. Maybe, just maybe, tonight could be different. The sleek black car of Elton Grayson pulled up to the entrance of New York's most luxurious hotel. A doorman opened the door with a practiced smile, formally greeting Elton while Lisa hesitated to step out behind him. Her heart raced so fast, it echoed in her ears. As her borrowed heels touched the gleaming marble entrance, she felt as if she had stepped onto forbidden ground. Around her, camera flashes went off relentlessly. Reporters and photographers captured every move of the magnates and their impeccably dressed companions. Women in haute couture gowns, adorned with jewelry that sparkled like stars, walked with a confidence Lisa knew she didn't possess. She glanced at herself, at the simple yet beautiful dress Anne had lent her. Though elegant, it felt insignificant amidst the sea of opulence. Elton, without looking back, strode purposefully toward the entrance, exchanging calculated smiles and handshakes with other businessmen. Lisa followed, feeling small and out of place. As she stepped into the grand ballroom, a chill ran down her spine. The scene looked like something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung like cascading lights, reflecting golden walls. The soft melody of a string quartet floated through the air, while impeccably dressed waiters moved gracefully with trays of champagne. The first curious glances lasted only seconds. A man near the entrance raised his eyebrows, and a woman beside him leaned in to whisper something. Lisa felt their eyes sweep over her, slicing through her fragile confidence. As she moved deeper into the room, more heads turned, and whispers began. The stark contrast between her and the lavish surroundings was undeniable, and no one made an effort to hide their curiosity. She focused on Elton's back, who was already blending into a group of investors at the center of the room. He didn't bother checking if Lisa was okay. She knew she was just a placeholder, a disposable presence he had to endure for Anne's sake. Despite wanting to escape, Lisa held her head high, clinging to Anne's words of encouragement. "You're more capable than you think." But here, surrounded by wealth and confidence, it was hard to believe that. While Elton engaged in lively conversations with other businessmen, Lisa stood quietly against a nearby wall, trying to remain inconspicuous. Yet Elton's complete disregard for her was evident, fueling the murmurs around her. Lisa felt the constant stares, some fleeting, others prolonged and even disdainful. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were thinking. Who is she? Why would Elton bring someone like her? She must be a maid. Look at that dress. The unspoken words echoed in her mind as if they had been shouted. Each fake smile and judging glance tightened the knot in her stomach. Lisa crossed her arms, not from the cold, but out of discomfort. She felt out of place, like a piece that didn't belong on this luxurious chessboard. For a moment, her eyes caught her reflection in one of the ballroom's tall windows. There she was, standing still, with the expression of someone who wished to disappear. Her dress seemed even plainer under the ballroom's lights, and the borrowed shoes pinched her feet, but Lisa dared not move. She knew any misstep could draw even more unwanted attention. Elton continued ignoring her entirely. Surrounded by sharply dressed men laughing at private jokes and sharing business anecdotes, Lisa observed from afar, trying to decipher the conversations. Yet, the technical jargon and authoritative tone felt like an insurmountable wall. Still, a part of her wanted to listen more. Each word seemed like a puzzle piece she could fit together, if only given enough time. But no one noticed her. She was invisible. A waiter approached her with a tray of champagne. Lisa politely declined, afraid that any bold move might spark more commentary. She looked down at her hands, clasping them together to mask her nervousness. She wanted to remain polite, proper, but the weight of being so out of place was crushing. Suddenly, loud laughter erupted from a nearby group. A striking woman in a stunning red dress turned her gaze directly at Lisa, while laughing at something a man beside her had said. Lisa's cheeks flushed, even without knowing the joke. It was exactly the kind of moment she dreaded. being scrutinized and ridiculed without any chance to defend herself. Meanwhile, Elton, fully aware of Lisa's discomfort, chose to ignore her entirely. To him, she was an obligation imposed by Anne, nothing more. Deep down, he was annoyed by the situation and vented that frustration through his complete indifference. To him, Lisa was a glaring reminder that the evening was not going as it should. Inside Lisa, however, a storm was brewing. Why had she agreed to this? Why had she let Anne's opinion weigh so heavily on her? What was she trying to prove? Doubts and thoughts tangled into a knot in her throat. She wanted to be strong, to show she could face anything, but it was hard. The room seemed to squeeze her, as if the very walls wanted to eject her. Every passing minute added to Lisa's sense of suffocation. Every echo of laughter in the ballroom felt like a mockery of her presence. Every step Elton took further away seemed to widen the chasm between them, making it clear she was utterly alone in this place. But no matter how much she wanted to vanish, Lisa took a deep breath and forced herself to stand tall. She couldn't let Anne down. The only thing keeping her upright was her determination not to disappoint the one person who believed in her. The energy in the ballroom pulsed with lively conversations between business people and investors. Words like profit, strategy, and stocks floated in the air like notes from a melody Lisa Carter wasn't sure she was meant to hear. Leaning against a nearby wall, she stayed in the shadows, observing Elton Grayson command attention from a circle of sharp-suited men discussing market trends and business strategies. Lisa, ever the quiet observer, knew her only option was to remain invisible, just a shadow in a world where she didn't belong. But as she listened, something inside her began to shift. Amidst the laughter and clinking champagne glasses, Lisa caught a comment that pricked her ears. One of the businessmen, a robust and self-assured man named Richard Vaughan, was explaining his strategy for a new investment. He spoke with such conviction that the group around him nodded as if his words were gospel. But to Lisa, something seemed off. It was a technical mistake, an approach that, in her opinion, wouldn't yield the results he was promising. Lisa tried to ignore the thought. This wasn't her place to correct anyone or offer opinions. She was merely the maid dragged into this event by circumstance. But as Richard repeated the error, an uneasiness grew inside her. Her hands began to sweat. Her heart raced. She knew she should stay silent, but a voice inside screamed otherwise. The tension between her fear of speaking up and her need to correct the glaring error built to a breaking point. Richard continued, and before she could stop herself, Lisa leaned forward slightly, as though her body had decided what her mind was still debating. When he finished his triumphant explanation, Lisa spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but tinged with palpable nervousness. The entire group turned toward her, their faces registering shock and disbelief. The sudden silence was so stark that even the music in the background seemed louder. Lisa felt her face burn, but she couldn't retreat now. She had committed. "I'm sorry, but I think there's a slight issue with the approach you mentioned, Mr. Vaughan," she continued, carefully choosing her words. "If you consider current market trends and the behavior of tech stocks over the last 5 years, you'll see your projection has some gaps." Richard blinked, stunned. No one had ever corrected him like that, least of all someone so clearly outside their circle. Elton, who stood among the group, froze. His expression hardened, and his icy glare pierced Lisa. She tried to ignore it as she pressed on. "I believe that instead of directing funds into that category of stocks, you should consider diversifying into a portfolio with a stronger focus on emerging markets. For example, projections for Southeast Asia show a much more stable and promising growth potential." Every word felt like it weighed a ton, but Lisa's voice remained clear. Her knowledge came from years of secretly studying investments. Reading late into the night after her work at the Grayson mansion, she absorbed financial reports, articles, and even the books Elton left lying around. She never imagined that knowledge would be useful, let alone in a moment like this. The silence grew heavier. A few men exchanged glances, as if trying to decide whether her comment deserved attention or dismissal. Richard, visibly annoyed, opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut in. "She's right." The speaker was Charles Morgan, a renowned investor who had been quiet until now. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Lisa with genuine interest. "I was thinking the same thing. Emerging markets have shown remarkable resilience, especially post-pandemic. Tell me, miss." "Lisa," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me, Lisa, how did you arrive at those conclusions? It's rare to hear such a precise analysis outside our circles. Lisa felt a lump in her throat. This was surreal. On one hand, she was relieved someone had validated her point, but on the other, Elton's withering look felt like a knife. She steadied herself and replied, "I read a lot, Mr. Morgan. I've always been fascinated by how the market works." "It's not professional, it's just a personal interest." Charles smiled, clearly impressed. "Well, I must say your personal interest is more insightful than many professional opinions I've heard." Richard, visibly uncomfortable, tried to steer the conversation back to his original argument, but Charles kept asking Lisa questions, genuinely engaged in what she had to say. Gradually, the others in the group started listening too, shifting their attention from Richard to Lisa. Elton, however, remained silent, his face a rigid mask of disapproval. Lisa could hardly believe what was happening. For years, she had lived in the shadows, unseen and unheard. Now, she was at the center of a conversation with some of the most powerful men in the room, and they were listening. She should have felt proud, but the weight of Elton's judgment crushed her. She knew this wouldn't end well for her. The discussion lasted only a few minutes, though it felt like an eternity. When the conversation shifted to a new topic, Lisa retreated back to her spot by the wall. Her legs trembled, and her heart pounded, but she maintained her composure. Elton didn't look at her. He said nothing. But Lisa knew the storm was coming. Deep down, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. Elton could barely contain the fury boiling inside him, forcing a strained smile to stay in place. Lisa's words still echoed in his mind, each one a blow to his pride. She had dared to speak up uninvited during a critical business dinner. Worse, she had drawn the attention and admiration of men who were supposed to be focused on him. Lisa, on the other hand, didn't know what to make of what had just happened. Part of her felt a quiet pride, not because she wanted to overshadow Elton, but because, for once, she had felt seen and heard. Still, Elton's cold expression left no doubt in her mind that this night wouldn't end well for her. He barely acknowledged her for the remainder of the event. As the businessmen began to disperse, Charles Morgan gave Lisa a genuine smile and a firm handshake, while Elton impatiently urged her to follow him out. The ride home was silent but tense. The driver opened the car door for them, and Elton climbed in first, followed by Lisa, who avoided his gaze. As soon as the car started moving, the heavy silence broke. "Do you realize what you've done?" Elton's voice was low but filled with barely restrained anger. Lisa swallowed hard, trying to compose her thoughts before answering. "Mr. Grayson, I only wanted to help. I didn't mean to—" "Help?" he interrupted, his voice rising sharply. "You think speaking out of turn in front of the most influential men in the room was helping? You made me look like a complete fool. Everyone must be wondering why on earth I brought someone like you to an event like that." Lisa felt a lump in her throat as his words lashed at her like a whip. She fought to find her voice. "I only spoke up because I thought I could contribute. It was never my intention to disrespect you." "Contribute?" Elton let out a cold, humorless laugh. He turned to her, his gaze sharp as a blade. "You don't understand, do you? You're a maid, Lisa. Your place is in the house, taking care of what Anne and I entrust to you, not in this world. Never in this world." Lisa lowered her head, his words cutting deeper than she had expected. She knew she had overstepped, but she hadn't thought her intentions warranted this level of disdain. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. The air between them felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken tensions. For a moment the car was silent again. Lisa tried to speak once more, but Elton raised a hand, signaling he didn't want to hear another word. She leaned back in her seat, staring out the window. The city lights blurred as the tears she refused to shed clouded her vision. She realized that, to Elton, what she had done was unforgivable. And despite Anne's belief in her, Lisa knew that this moment marked the end of something. When they arrived at the mansion, Elton exited the car without a word, leaving Lisa behind. She waited until the driver opened her door before stepping out. As she walked into the house, she headed straight to her small room, carrying the weight of exhaustion and defeat. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she saw a woman who seemed older than her years. Her face bore the marks of fatigue, but her eyes still glimmered with a mix of anger and sadness. The next morning, Lisa awoke with a knot in her stomach. Something told her the worst was yet to come, and she was right. Around 10 o'clock, she was summoned to Elton's office. When she entered, he sat behind his dark wooden desk, his eyes fixed on a piece of paper he held in his hand. "Lisa, I'll be direct," he began without looking up. You can no longer work here." His words hit Lisa like a punch to the gut. She had expected something like this, but hearing the words spoken aloud felt like a nightmare coming true. "Mr. Grayson, please let me explain. I never meant to disrespect you. Everything I did was with good intentions." Elton finally lifted his gaze to meet hers. His expression was hard, but there was no hatred, only a chilling detachment. "Your intentions don't matter. What matters is the impact. You humiliated me, made me look weak. These people rely on their perception of me, and now every time they see me, they'll remember how my maid corrected them." Lisa felt tears well up, but she took a deep breath, determined not to let them fall. "Mr. Grayson, I've served this household for years. I've always done my best, cared for Mrs. Anne like she was my own family. Please don't fire me over a mistake that wasn't malicious." Elton sighed, as if eager to end the conversation. "Anne liked you. I trusted you too. Until last night. But that doesn't change the fact that you crossed a line." Before Lisa could say more, Anne appeared in the doorway. Her presence brought a wave of emotion and tension into the room. She looked pale but determined. "Elton, what are you doing?" Anne's voice carried an unusual authority. "Lisa doesn't deserve this." Elton stood, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Anne, this isn't something you can change. I'm not discussing this with you." Anne ignored him, stepping closer to Lisa with a sorrowful expression. "I'm so sorry, Lisa. If it were up to me, this wouldn't be happening." Lisa said nothing. She felt crushed between Anne's kindness and Elton's cold judgment. She simply nodded, knowing it was pointless to argue further. That afternoon, she packed her belongings, saying a quiet goodbye to the home she had worked so hard to maintain. As she stepped out the front door, the cold wind mocked her pain. The Grayson mansion disappeared behind her, but Elton's words still echoed in her mind. "You don't belong in this world." Lisa Carter walked through the streets of New York with a small suitcase in hand, tears streaming down her face despite her efforts to hold them back. She felt empty, as if years of dedication had been discarded with a snap of Elton's fingers. The mansion that had been her refuge was now just a bitter memory. Lisa Carter walked through the streets of New York, her small suitcase clutched tightly in her hand. The biting wind seemed to mock her, whipping her hair across her tear-streaked face. She felt hollow, as though years of dedication had been tossed aside in an instant. The Grayson mansion, once a place of refuge and routine, now stood only as a bitter memory in her mind. Elton's cruel words, "You don't belong in this world," echoed with every step she took. She arrived at her modest apartment, a simple space that barely fit her belongings, but had always been her sanctuary. Setting her suitcase down, Lisa sank into the worn couch, her hands trembling as she clutched a glass of water. The loneliness pressed down on her like a weight. Despite the years of knowledge she had painstakingly acquired, those late nights spent studying finance after long workdays, none of it seemed to matter, at least not now. Yet as Lisa glanced at the small bookshelf in the corner, filled with financial books and notes she had taken over the years, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. Those hours spent poring over Elton's discarded reports and reading market analyses hadn't been for nothing. It was her passion, the one thing that made her feel alive. Maybe, just maybe, it could still mean something. On the other side of the city, Charles Morgan sat in his office, still reflecting on the previous evening. Lisa's boldness and intelligence had left an impression on him. In a room full of seasoned professionals, she had stood out, not just for her knowledge, but for her courage. Charles was appalled to hear that Elton had fired her. In his eyes, this was not just a mistake, it was a monumental loss. The following morning, Charles decided to act. He arrived at Lisa's apartment unannounced, knocking on the door with purpose. When she opened it, her face registered shock and confusion. "Mr. Morgan?" Lisa's voice trembled slightly. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I had to speak with you," Charles said warmly. "I heard what happened with Elton, and I can't just stand by. I see something in you, Lisa, something rare in business, a sharp mind and a bravery most people lack. I want to offer you an opportunity. Work with me." Lisa's immediate reaction was to refuse. The offer seemed too grand, too unreal. "Mr. Morgan, I'm grateful, but I don't think I'm the right person for this. I've never held a formal position in finance." Charles smiled, his confidence unshaken. "Lisa, formal education doesn't replace talent, and you have plenty of that. I don't care about diplomas or resumes. I care about whether you're willing to work hard and learn. So what do you say?" Lisa hesitated, her thoughts swirling with doubt, but deep inside, she knew this could be the chance she had been waiting for all her life. With a deep breath, she nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Charles laid out the details, giving her a week to prepare for her new role. But Lisa already knew she'd spend every moment until then immersing herself in everything she'd ever learned about finance. As the days passed, Lisa threw herself into her new job with tireless dedication. Despite her nerves, she quickly found her footing. Her analyses and strategies were so precise and creative that within months, Charles's firm began seeing remarkable results. Lisa's ability to predict market trends and spot hidden opportunities amazed her colleagues. Of course, the road wasn't without challenges. Some of her co-workers, discovering her background, doubted her capabilities. Whispered comments followed her through the hallways, and a few even looked down on her openly. But Lisa kept her focus on her work, determined to prove her worth through results. Charles, ever the supportive mentor, made it clear he valued Lisa's contributions. In meetings, he openly praised her efforts and encouraged her to take on larger projects. "You're the best thing to happen to this company in years, Lisa," he told her after a successful investor presentation. Lisa's efforts paid off. The company thrived under her influence, breaking records and gaining recognition in the industry. With her newfound financial security, Lisa moved out of her small apartment and began building a life she had never dared to dream of. Despite her success, Lisa remained humble. She never forgot the struggles she had endured or the people who had doubted her. There were nights when she sat alone in her new home, thinking back to the Grayson mansion and Elton's cutting words. But those memories, while painful, fueled her determination to keep climbing. She had proven she was more than anyone had imagined, not just an accessory, but an essential force. Across town, Elton Grayson sat in his luxurious office, staring out the window as rain streaked the glass. The once mighty businessman was now haunted by a steady stream of failures. His company, once a symbol of power and precision, was crumbling under the weight of his stubborn decisions. He had ignored the warnings of his team and doubled down on risky ventures, only to face devastating losses. But what gnawed at Elton most wasn't just the decline of his business. It was the constant reminder of Lisa Carter. Her name appeared everywhere, in financial news articles, at industry events, and in conversations among investors. She had become a rising star under Charles Morgan, lauded for her innovative strategies and impressive results. Meanwhile, Elton's reputation was fading. The irony stung. How could a woman he had dismissed as just a maid now outshine him? How had she found success while he faced failure? The bitterness of this realization festered within him. One day, after yet another scathing call from investors demanding answers, Elton found himself pacing his office, the walls adorned with hollow symbols of past achievements. Memories of Lisa's boldness at the dinner haunted him. He hated to admit it, but she had been right. He had been wrong. And his refusal to see her value had cost him dearly. At home, Anne watched her husband with growing concern. His once unshakable confidence had given way to silence and sleepless nights. One evening, as he nursed a glass of whiskey on the couch, Anne finally confronted him. "Elton, what's happening to you?" she asked gently, her voice tinged with worry. "It's nothing, Anne," he muttered without meeting her gaze. "It's not nothing," she pressed, sitting beside him. "The company is in trouble, isn't it?" For a moment, Elton said nothing, staring into his glass. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, he admitted, "They're losing faith in me. Everything I've built, it's falling apart." Anne placed a hand on his, but he pulled away. "I've always believed in you, Elton," she said softly. "But maybe it's time to listen to others, to change your approach." He scoffed bitterly. "Like Lisa, the woman I fired for overstepping her bounds, now she's a star and everyone worships her. You want me to crawl to her and beg for help? Never." Anne's eyes filled with sadness. "This isn't about Lisa. It's about you, Elton. Your pride is destroying everything. Maybe it's time to reconsider what really matters." Elton spent that night pacing the dark halls of their home, unable to shake Anne's words. He wanted to blame Lisa for his misery, but deep down he knew the truth. His failures were his own. Admitting that, however, was something he still wasn't ready to do. The rain fell softly over New York, tracing delicate trails down the foggy windows of Lisa Carter's small apartment. Despite her recent success and the comfort her new position at Charles Morgan's firm brought her, the day felt heavy with a different weight. Lisa stared at the address written on a slip of paper in her hand. It was for the Grayson mansion, a place she hadn't set foot in since the night she left. Yet Anne's voice lingered in her memory, warm, kind, but filled with sorrow. Lisa had learned that Anne's health had worsened. No matter the pain Elton had caused her, she couldn't ignore the woman who had always treated her with dignity and respect. With a deep breath, she grabbed her umbrella and stepped into the cold wind slicing through the city streets. When she arrived at the mansion, it looked different. The once pristine gardens showed signs of neglect, and while the house still stood tall and imposing, there was a melancholy air about it. Lisa hesitated at the door before pressing the bell. When it opened, she wasn't greeted by a servant or staff, but by Anne herself. Anne looked thinner, her skin pale, and her movements slower than Lisa remembered. Yet she smiled warmly, a flicker of her former self shining through. "Lisa, you came," Anne said softly, her voice heavy with emotion. Lisa returned the smile, though tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "I heard you weren't well. I couldn't stay away." Anne gestured for Lisa to enter. The house was eerily quiet, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the halls. They settled in the living room where a fire crackled weakly in the hearth, bringing a faint warmth to the otherwise somber space. Lisa studied Anne's fragile frame, but also noticed the strength still burning in her eyes. "You look wonderful, Lisa," Anne said, reaching for her hand. "I've seen your name in the papers. I'm so proud of you." Lisa's heart ached at the sincerity in Anne's voice. For all her recent accomplishments, she still felt the sting of everything that had happened in this house. "Thank you, Mrs. Anne. But how are you?" "Really?" Anne hesitated, as if debating whether to spare Lisa the truth, but then sighed. "The truth is, I'm not well. My health is failing. But that's not what worries me most." Lisa leaned forward, her eyes locked on Anne's. "What is it? Please tell me." Anne looked out the window, as though searching for strength. Her voice wavered when she finally spoke. "Elton's company is on the verge of collapse. He's made terrible decisions, taken risks he shouldn't have, and now everything we've built is crumbling. He's desperate, Lisa. I've never seen him like this." The words struck Lisa like a blow. She knew Elton's pride, his inability to admit weakness. She could only imagine the toll this was taking on him. Memories of his harsh dismissal and cutting words resurfaced, but when she looked at Anne, broken by illness and pain, Lisa couldn't turn away. "He doesn't tell me everything," Anne continued, her voice faltering. "But I see it. He's more distant, colder. He spends his nights locked in his office, drinking and searching for answers. I try to help, but he won't listen. I think he's afraid of worrying me even more." Lisa gripped Anne's hands tightly, sensing the urgency in her words. "Mrs. Anne, I know how stubborn he can be, but maybe I can help. I can't promise anything, but I can't stand by and do nothing." Anne looked at Lisa with a mix of gratitude and hesitation. "You've already done so much, Lisa, and he treated you in a way I'll never forgive. I can't ask you to get involved in this." Lisa lowered her gaze for a moment, recalling the humiliation and pain Elton had caused her. But then she thought of Anne, the one person who had always believed in her, always treated her with kindness. "I'm not doing this for him," Lisa finally said. "I'm doing it for you. Because you believed in me when no one else did. I owe you that." Tears filled Anne's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, as though trying to hide her vulnerability. "You're an incredible woman, Lisa. I knew that from the beginning, but I never imagined you'd be this strong." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. For Lisa, this wasn't just about repaying a kindness. It was a chance to prove to herself that she could rise above the past and make something good out of something broken. As Lisa left the mansion that afternoon, the wind still bit at her face, but she no longer felt the same weight of defeat she once had. She wasn't the same woman who had left that house months ago, suitcase in hand and heart shattered. Now she was determined to make a difference, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. That night, Lisa stayed awake, seated in her small apartment's armchair, flipping through the worn notebook that had accompanied her since the early days of her studies. Her conversation with Anne replayed in her mind, heavy with responsibility. What she was about to undertake required not just technical skill, but emotional strength she wasn't sure she still had. The wounds Elton had inflicted on her hadn't fully healed, but Anne's pleading eyes left her no choice. Lisa wasn't doing this for forgiveness or redemption. She was doing it for Anne. When the first light of dawn filtered through her window, Lisa had made her decision. She dressed simply but carried herself with the dignity of someone who knew her worth. Arriving at Elton's company building, she walked past the curious glances of the receptionist and staff, her head held high. When she entered his office, the sight before her was almost shocking. The once polished Elton Grayson now sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by disheveled piles of papers. His head snapped up at the sound of her voice. "Elton," Lisa said firmly, without a hint of hostility. He stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to guarded suspicion. For a moment he said nothing, as though trying to process why she was there. "What are you doing here, Lisa?" he finally asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. Lisa took a steadying breath. "I came to help." Elton let out a bitter laugh, leaning back in his chair. "Help? After everything? You don't need to rub your success in my face. I already know I lost, Lisa. That's not why I'm here," she said calmly. "I came because Anne is worried, because I believe your company can be saved, and because I owe it to her." Elton studied her for a long moment, his pride and weariness warring in his expression. "You think you can save this?" He gestured to the mess of documents on his desk. "This is more than numbers, Lisa. It's a disaster." "It's not impossible," Lisa replied, stepping closer. "But you'll need to listen, and you'll need to trust me, even if it's the last thing you want to do." Elton's silence stretched as he weighed her words. Finally, he sighed and gestured for her to sit. "Fine. Tell me what you've got." Lisa opened her folder and began outlining her plan. Her strategies were simple yet effective, grounded in a thorough analysis of Elton's mistakes and the opportunities still within reach. As she spoke, her clarity and conviction silenced Elton's doubts, though he tried to mask his growing admiration. In the weeks that followed, Lisa threw herself into the work, determined to turn things around. Slowly, the first signs of recovery began to show. Elton's business, which had teetered on the brink of collapse, started to regain its footing. In the weeks that followed, Lisa worked tirelessly to implement her strategies. She spent long hours in Elton's office, analyzing reports, tweaking plans, and presenting solutions with precision and confidence. At first, Elton struggled to fully trust her. His pride made him reluctant to cede control, but as the results began to show, his resistance softened. Investments that had seemed like lost causes started to recover. Relationships with estranged business partners were rebuilt, and the company began clawing its way back from the brink. One evening, while Lisa was poring over a final report in the office, Elton walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. He set one down on her desk and sat across from her, a gesture so simple yet laden with meaning. "I underestimated you, Lisa," Elton admitted after a moment of silence. "I was wrong about you. Not just at that dinner, but for all the years you worked for us. I didn't see who you truly were. I only saw what I wanted to see. And now I realize how blind I was." Lisa looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I didn't do this for you, Elton," she said, her tone steady but gentle. "I did it for Anne. She believes in you, even when you don't believe in yourself." Elton nodded, a faint regretful smile tugging at his lips. "Anne has always been the best part of me, and you're more generous than I deserve." That night marked a turning point. Elton began to recognize Lisa not only for her intelligence, but for her resilience and character. He saw in her someone who had risen far beyond the limits he had once imposed. Over time, their dynamic shifted. Elton became less defensive and more open to her ideas, and Lisa found it easier to work alongside him. As the weeks turned into months, Lisa's efforts bore fruit. The company's recovery became undeniable. Profits returned, new opportunities emerged, and the employees who had once feared for their jobs breathed a collective sigh of relief. Lisa had saved the company, and in many ways, saved Elton as well. The golden light of sunset streamed through the tall windows of the Grayson mansion, bathing the room in warmth. Anne sat on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket. Though her illness had left her physically frail, her eyes shone with a renewed sense of hope. The company's recovery had brought not only financial relief, but also a sense of peace that had seemed lost for so long. Lisa stood in the kitchen preparing tea for Anne. The familiar task brought a sense of quiet satisfaction. Working with Elton again had been emotionally taxing, but it had also proven her strength. She had faced the man who had humiliated her and turned the pain of the past into something meaningful. And yet a small part of her still wondered if Elton truly understood the depth of the hurt he had caused. When Lisa returned to the living room with the tea tray, she found Elton standing beside Anne, His usual air of authority was tempered with a rare vulnerability. He turned to face Lisa as she entered, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate. "Lisa," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "there's something I need to say." She set the tray down, straightened her posture, and waited. There was something about the way he spoke that compelled her to listen. "I owe you an apology," Elton said, his tone sincere. "Not just for what happened recently, but for all the years I treated you as if you were less than you are. I let my pride and arrogance blind me. At that dinner, I didn't see your courage or your intelligence. Instead, I felt threatened, like your brilliance somehow diminished me. And when I fired you, it was the worst mistake I've ever made. My pride cost me everything, and you had every reason to walk away. But you didn't." Lisa crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Inside, emotions swirled. She thought back to the many times Elton had dismissed her, the humiliation she had endured, but she also saw the change in him, the humility he had never shown before. "Elton," she said after a long pause, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "hearing this doesn't erase what happened. It's not easy to forget how you made me feel, how small you made me feel. There were times I thought I'd never want to see you again." Elton flinched at her words but held her gaze. Lisa continued, "But I can see that you've changed. And for Anne's sake, for everything we've been through, I'm choosing to let it go. I forgive you." Tears welled in Anne's eyes as she reached for Lisa's hand. "You've always been extraordinary," Anne said softly. "And seeing the two of you move past this, it means the world to me." Elton nodded, his expression a mixture of gratitude and remorse. "Thank you, Lisa. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll work every day to earn it." Later that evening, as the Graysons and Lisa sat together, Charles Morgan arrived, carrying a bottle of wine and his signature warm smile. "I hope I'm not intruding," he joked, but his tone softened when he saw the atmosphere in the room. "You're just in time," Anne said, smiling. "We've been celebrating new beginnings." Charles turned to Lisa, pride evident in his eyes. "Lisa, I never doubted you'd make a difference, but seeing you here helping those who didn't deserve your help shows just how remarkable you are." Lisa blushed slightly, but met his gaze with quiet confidence. "Thank you, Charles. Your belief in me made all the difference." The evening passed in laughter and reflection, a rare moment of peace and connection. For Lisa, it felt like a long overdue resolution, a chance to leave the past behind and embrace a future filled with possibility. Months later, at a grand celebration hosted by Charles Morgan, Lisa stood in the spotlight, surrounded by colleagues and well-wishers. As Charles raised a toast to her, she spoke, holding up her worn notebook as a symbol of her journey. "This notebook is where I began," she said, her voice steady. "It holds the lessons I learned during long nights after days of hard work. It's proof that no matter where you come from, what matters most is where you're willing to go." The crowd applauded, but for Lisa the moment was deeply personal. It was a reminder of how far she had come and how far she still had to go. When Charles later asked her if she'd ever consider running her own company, Lisa smiled thoughtfully. For the first time, the idea felt possible. "Maybe it's time for the next step," she said. As she looked up at the stars that night, Lisa felt a quiet certainty. Her journey was only just beginning. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Don't miss the video on the screen now. Click to keep watching stories that will move and inspire you.